Recording is going to. Okay, we're recording.
Boom,
Okay, so
perfect.
hello, welcome everyone. Yeah, I'm here with Bilal, and he's written a book on literacy and orality and the kind of transition and tension between orality and literacy.
Mhm.
Um, I normally start with a question for kind of people that are self-publishing, like what motivated you to write this book, and like
Oh,
what
that's a good question.
uh,
I would say at first this book wasn't the first book I wrote in a sense. Like I wrote maybe two iterations of this,
mm,
and the topic was on secularism actually. So I have like two other books that are some pseudo secularist type of books questioning foundations of like from first principle foundations. But then I got to a point where I read two books that changed my outlook, and it was Marshall McLuhan's book, Medium to Message.
yeah.
And it was Ivan Illich's book, The Alphabetization of Popular Mind, and it was Barry Sanders' books, A is for Ox.
Okay.
And I realized right then how important not only the transition from orality to literacy was, but how important was the sort of Greek silent vowel consonant letters, that whole revolution and how that changed the way we look at
Mm.
the world.
Yeah.
So I kind of scrapped everything and I started fresh again. But then like they all have like they all work in a sense, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
was it was kind of a journey I went on.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Because you can see from the book that you've done like the quite a good background of research that's gone into it. You know, you've read the Greeks. You've got these other references to Illich and also Ong. I wanted to ask you about Ong because
Hmm.
someone's mentioned it to me one time, and I remember thinking, God, I have to read about Ong because he talks about kind of orality and mythology and stuff. And I was
Hmm.
like, okay, that's kind of cool because I'm into mythology and I like to contemplate the use of mythology within Plato and the sort of potential benefits that philosophers can get from mythology and I was like, okay, I gotta read this Ong guy, and then
Hmm.
I never actually did. But then when you sent me your book, I was like, okay, good.
Yeah.
Now I can actually
Hmm.
find out more about Ong, so that's good.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a bit? Because Ong is, if I unless I'm mistaken, Ong is kind of like the OG of
True.
orality studies. Yeah.
But Ong is sort of a student of Marshall McLuhan.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about the students of McLuhan, you could say Ong, Neil Postman, and there's another third dude, but those are some of the big ones, you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
And they always talk about new literacy. So the media for Neil Postman and Wong and Walter went through the path of talking about sort of, I think because he was a preacher as well. I think he was a Christian. So I do understand that why he went to sort of the poetic side of it all to talk about the myths, because Christianity does have a bit of that in it. So I do understand why he went to the past. So those are sort of the students of Marshall McLuhan. So I do still believe the OG's McLuhan,
Okay. Yeah.
because he
Okay.
even wrote a book on the Gutenberg press as well.
Hmm.
So I think from McLuhan we can get an idea of who Walter Ong is or who Neil Postman is and see how new literacy or new media shaped what's going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those underappreciated areas of study is kind of media studies. You know, it sounds almost like, like if you think of the humanities as a kind of branch, a family branch, like I feel like media studies is like the embarrassing cousin or something. No one really thinks about it or what talks about it, you know?
I can say,
And
yeah, that's true.
but like now it's more like, oh, okay, now look at the technology we have. Like, we don't have um if we don't have flying cars, we don't have like a cure for cancer, we don't even have high speed, like super high speed railways in most developed countries, but we do have like communication technologies. Like we've just mastered communication. It's
Yes, we have. And not only that, like I feel like for the most part, it's not that we've stagnated, but it's the ways we haven't really taken a step back to talk about how sort of the digital landscape has affected us, you know, or how communication has. And that's why you see on Twitter, like it's such a big thing. People will put up like how AI has taken or LLMs have taken a part of our brain. And I don't know if you've seen that, like how memory recall
mm,
has gone to shit and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the funny thing is, Plato exactly talked about that in Phaedrus when he's talking about, the story of the king who was presented the alphabets to help the people remember stuff, and he said, "No, this is going to kill memory. I don't want this." So the exact same
Mhm.
thing has already been talked about in Plato.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's an interesting angle there. I've been looking at it or thinking about it right now because I was reading back my book and I'm just like, bro, this is exactly some of the AI problems that we're going through right now.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's weird how like we think we're in this unique historical time, and in some sense we are because the technology
Hmm.
is so globalized and advanced, but the sort of core tensions are were there from the
Yeah, it's
beginning,
it's
totally.
when what happens when a technology comes and it starts externalizing your memory. When we can
Yeah.
save
Yeah.
things in documents versus saving things in a book, what's the difference really? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
the exact same thing. And then when we talk about it, it's also the problem of transferred epithets. When you talk about books, the way you talk about, a computer holding memory. Now, does a book hold knowledge? Is a book knowledgeable? Is a computer knowledgeable? It's like, no, these things just hold information. And that's the same problem that
Mm,
people have when we talk about ChatGPT. Is it thinking? No, it's not thinking. It's doing probability. It's doing Bayesian probabilities or whatever. You
processing.
know what I mean? It's doing processing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's crazy that people can start holding these things to higher standards when we're like, and this is when media studies now has a chance to sort of fight back. And people have always talked about the rise of humanities needs to come sooner rather than later. And that's, when we're talking about unheard and we're talking about sort of the banality when we talked about in messages.
Mm,
And that's what they don't get too. They just talking about, oh, we need to return to the. It's like, no, what we need to do is just return to community in a sense to return to like people talking through dialogue, open dialogue, not through these digitalized systems of like argumentation and so on and so forth, because that's the only thing that it fosters.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually I was at a museum of communications recently in Germany. So there's a museum in Germany called the Museum of Communications, and it does a little history of like the first technologies of communication, like like it'll start with like even like prelingual tribal peoples, and apparently even like the muscles which we needed to refine in order to actually speak in real language. Like it starts all the way there and then it goes all the way to like the internet, and it's an interesting museum. And one of the things that I because I've done a course on Paul Virilio with my friend Joshua Hansen. So he talks about speed technologies and media communication, this like the speed of communication. And one of the things that is very Virillian about the museum was, for example, they said like in World War One, it was the first time the general could be
Hmm.
like 100 kilometers away from the battlefield because he could communicate all his orders from 100 kilometers away. So it was the first
Hmm.
time, I was and like the all previous wars, the general had to be within like shouting distance, basically,
Hmm.
And that really affected like the relationship between authority because it's like,
Hmm.
well, where's the general? He's not here. He's like in a comfortable bunker 100 kilometers away, and we're in the trenches getting shot at. Like, so
Hmm.
there's all this kind of stuff of like the, the explosion of communication technologies has been really negative in many ways. So I was kind of thinking about that, but that anyway, to avoid going on too much of a tangent about communication tech, I want to get into the kind of basic theoretical structure of the book. And I just said
Okay.
so I haven't read all of it yet. I've read like the first maybe third of it.
Okay.
Um, but that seems to be that seems to be where you introduce this basic kind of theoretical schema, and it seems to be
Hmm.
like mythos and logos basically. So
Hmm.
mythos is more orality, and then literary
Logos.
societies
Yes.
is logos. So there's a kind of contention between two. And you mentioned I want to talk about Plato a little bit, maybe a bit later too, because he sort of seems to be a manifestation of kind of a transitionary period between these two, and he's sort of trying to maybe balance both of them to some extent.
Yeah, yeah. Ivan Illich calls him the first uneasy man of letters.
Okay.
So he
Uneasy. So he's not, yeah,
uneasy, yeah.
he's
So
cautious about it. Yeah.
he's cautious about it, yeah, and that's what he writes about in the Phaedrus and so on and so forth. And even the allegory of the cave, it's the ability to like, the externalization of thought, the shadows, and this is why he didn't like myths so much. But we can go back for a bit. Like the most important thing about myths, and we could talk about Walter Ong right now, is that myths are sort of these circular and they sort of have imagery. simple, and they're usually called to like whiny, dark sea, and they have these new and interesting languages, but it's also a play. It's also done in front of people, and there's usually music connected to this. So
Mm,
all these things connect it with it being memorized easily and also taking hold of people's heartstrings. And that's why Plato didn't like myths because he was saying it doesn't give you the ability to take a step back and be like, what are we really being telling our people? Are these
mm,
myths actually good?
mm,
So that's why even the allegory of the cave, that's like the myths are the shadows in the cave.
mm.
It's difficult to take a step back and say like, are these shadows, are these myths good? And taking that step out into the light, I think, for me, I make the argument that that is what literacy is to them. It's that first step into the light, being able to distance yourself from what's going on. Um,
Oh,
and that's
actually,
like, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
no, I was gonna actually just have to get the quote up because I took some screenshots of some interesting quotes because you go into kind of a lot of different of the ancient Greeks kind of philosophers and thinkers, and you sort of
Hmm.
kind of try to describe this
Yeah.
distinction. And what I was getting from the distinction was actually something almost was kind of cognitive. Like there's a cognitive relation that
Hmm.
oral that the mythos has, and it's just different to logos and so literature and orality. There's like they're kind of orientating us cognitively towards the world.
Yes.
And then there's a
Yes.
distinction between those two. And I was kind of like, well, how do we describe distinction? And I thought one of the descriptions, sorry, the quotes on my phone, and I have to keep it locking. Okay. One of the things I wanted to read a few little paragraphs because I thought that there were some interesting observations here. So you say
Hmm.
Thales' declaration that all things are full of gods crystallizes oral culture's participatory worldview. So that was interesting because participatory, it's more participatory, where agency
Hmm.
permeates both natural and human realms. His assertion that magnets possess souls, psyche, because they attract iron mirrors the Homeric practice of imbuing objects with narrative vitality, such as Achilles' speaking shield in Iliad. And then later you say, this is on Heraclitus. You say, by framing reality as a dynamic interplay of opposites, war is the father of all things. Heraclitus rejected the static being of later metaphysics, instead embracing the oral tradition's preference for agonistic tension. His fragments function as cognitive puzzles, requiring performative unpacking in a communal setting, where the very act of interpretation mirrored the ceaseless flux he described. So is that yeah? So there's a real like
Hmm.
ontological and sort of epistemic kind of orientation going on there within the kind of oral cultures. They're sometimes
Hmm.
dismissed. I think we were talking about Unheard as an Unheard interview complaining about falling literacy rates. It probably
Hmm.
is an issue, but like
It is, it is.
but
Hmm.
it was described in a bit of a sort of like, it was kind of like a kind of idealization of like, I don't know, 19th century sort of like novels or something. This is like the
Yes.
greatest,
Very
this is
surface
this is the
area.
greatest society. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
all societies had some interesting things going on because you see Nietzsche complaining about static metaphysics later on and a lack of
Hmm.
becoming, everyone's being, not becoming, and
Hmm.
this sort of talk about the agonistic tension and the participatory performative puzzles. And I feel like there is a sort of vitality
Hmm.
there to the oral cultures that
Hmm.
that literary cultures maybe don't understand. Would that be fair?
Yes. And one of the I didn't want to fall into this problem that you're talking about as well. It's not to glorify orality, and it's not to glorify their great language or their great ability to tell stories.
Mm.
It's like literature did provide us with a lot. And the cognitive framework, we go back to that quickly. I think the point that Heraclitus says, and you cannot step in the same river twice. It's legitimately a perfect example of the oral mind. Because me and you, if I ask you, can you step in the same river twice? What's your answer going to be?
Here's the thing: I have to go. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I have to really sort of.
Be fair, be fair. But what if off the top, what are you going to say?
I would say I think I would probably use my stupid modern rational brain and say something
Good.
well, I could step into the same ground twice, but the water would be different
Hmm.
or something like that, right?
Perfect. So you could, okay, see. So this is the cognitive framework I want to explain to you. So in orality, or what in literature, what we have is this first, second, and third person interrogation. We're able to do the I's, the you's, the me, the us, which is connected to spatial temporality, which is you're able to take distance and separate yourself from the world on whether you want to say first, second, or third degree levels of spatial temporality, which I talk about later in the book, and I use art as an example for that. But the important thing is you have distance. And this is what Marshall McLuhan talked about
Mm.
very, very importantly too. He says that literacy, one of the most best sort of interesting inventions is the vanishing point in art. And that's legitimately taking the person from the equation and able to, draw these grand pictures. And
Mm.
that's what literacy gives us. So when an oral person hears, "Can you step in the same river twice?" They'll be like, "Of course not." Because they're a part of the world. Like everything is one. It's just circular. We're all together in this world together. This is one world. We're a community. There
Mm.
is no separation. But for us, we're able to be like, no, the me from yesterday, the me from today, the me from tomorrow, that past, present, and future tense. That's what literacy gives us. And likewise,
Okay.
it gives the ability to step into Owen's. Now I could be like, I'm in Owen's mindset. What's Owen doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the. So when I talk about the cognitive sort of change that happen, it's legitimately this technological shift in our brain about how to view the world.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And there was a reference in the book. I can't remember the exact experiment. It was in the Soviet Union, wasn't it? When they had was it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was someone that wanted to do a study on like how people think with illiterate
Yes.
peasant societies, and then
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
they came to all of these weird conclusions of how
Yeah.
they think
About
differently, and it was really interesting.
yeah. Let me see if I can find one example.
Yeah.
Okay, so his name is Alexandra Luria. So I just this is from Barry Sanders' book Ace Frogs as well. He went to these oral people and he says, "Describe yourselves," and they replied, "We behave well. If we were bad, no one would respect us." So they don't have the ability to be like, "What do you mean me? Like we are a community. You respect
Okay.
the community. We are part of we are all one."
Yeah.
So that ability to individualize, and that's why later on in when I talk about Democritus and I talk about atomism, I say atomism is the first example of individualism that comes into play in the world. Because literacy gives us the ability to start breaking ideas down iteratively. And that's why we get atomism in the first place. Atomism can never exist in an oral world.
Mm.
And likewise, the individual can never exist in an oral world.
Mm.
So that's the whole point of orality in the sense that there is no separation between us. We're all one. In
Yeah.
literacy, now we're able to believe that there is an I, there's a greater I. And I talk about that in example with, I compare Oedipus Rex and Shakespeare. So I say in Oedipus Rex, there's this grand we. Fate is what drives us. Fate
Mm.
is this sort of greater thing that we sort of are a slave to. But then in Hamlet, that sort of we doesn't exist anymore. The I, or the capital little I call it, is what determines how Hamlet or any of these figures determine the world around them. It is what happens to them, and they are the ones who then cause the effect.
Mm.
So that cause and effect angle doesn't exist in sort of the old stories, these old epics. It's all just one big carnage that happens. It's one great story of fate, battles that happen together.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, because when I was talking about the Unheard interview, there is a kind of romanticization I think they have of like the individual
Yeah.
alone in their house
Yes.
reading a novel, and there's a strong sense of like personal subjectivity and kind of
Mm-hmm.
individual morality. And there's something what's quite
Mm-hmm.
Protestant too. It's quite a Protestant sort of ideal, I think, as well. Um,
Interesting.
because I do think there's a little bit of a I definitely do think that the kind of Western Protestant societies and actually, this fits because I don't know if you know Emmanuel Todd. He's a French theorist, and he's kind of demographics and all this stuff. And he
Okay.
says that actually that the big revolution that happened with Protestantism in the West was literacy, basically mass
Oh,
literacy.
cool.
Well,
Okay. Okay.
those
Okay.
societies got. He wasn't like it was because they were better at technology or better at economics. It was like all that was just a symptom of literacy. But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, then you kind of get this idealism of the person who is kind of alone with their individual morality, their kind of individual subjectivity, and
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of they're sort of contemplating their personal existence through reading a novel. It's kind of idealized sort
Mm-hmm.
of not Shakespearean. It's a bit later. It's a bit like 19th century maybe or something. But and that has been, I think, in many ways the sort of ideal, sort of educated, civically
Hmm.
good
Hmm.
person. That's been the ideal for I think a few hundred years now. Um, and I wonder, I wonder. I'm always sort of
Mm.
like I'm morally ambiguous about all this stuff of declining literacy rates and this kind of mass communication technology because I kind of wonder like on some level, yes, bad, but is the oral culture sort of implicitly pushing back a little bit or something? We have so much podcasting and so much uh
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like,
perhaps there's like a less of an individual
mhm.
literacy kind of individual literate man. There's less of an idealization around that seems to be these days. There seems to be a challenge to that. Now a lot of it's kind of degenerate, just like media consumption, but I don't
Yes,
know.
yes, yeah,
Is
yeah,
there
yeah,
is
yeah.
there a little bit of a pushback maybe going on?
Well, quickly to your point
Yeah.
on the culture of learning, or I guess you're calling it. I have a part. So Plato also talked about this, and I could read this quickly. So this technological shift fundamentally altered the relationship between teacher and student, as well as past and present knowledge. No longer was education purely dependent on living presence of a teacher who had memorized cultural wisdom. Instead, it is not the speech, but the language of the past that can be made present. So Plato
Mm,
himself embodied this transition, having heard Pythagoras and Socrates, but not claiming to have dictation from them, instead boasting about his faculty of recollection while simultaneously creating the model never surpassed of the written dialogue that he's written, obviously. But he was already understood that the way people learned was changing in front of him. Instead
mm,
of it getting dictation from the people above him, from the pass down of like, public speech or, all these things that people use to learn. People were now, technology, like we talked about, was being held down in books now. You didn't need a teacher, like you said. You could just go by yourself into the room
mm.
and sit down and learn by yourself. And funnily enough, Augustine talked about it as well. I think he came in, I can't remember where I read this, but he came into a room and he was shocked to see people reading silently because that
Yeah.
didn't exist in his time. So he was, and this is specifically to the Greeks because they're the ones who created the consonants A, E, I, and O and U that allowed people to read quietly. That didn't exist beforehand. It's especially because most of
Oh,
the languages at that
yeah.
time were Semitic. So the Phoenicians, the Arabic, and the Hebrew, all these, to read these words, you have to actually read it out loud, and the word comes into being as you are reading it. But the Greeks were the ones who created the alphabet that we have today that allowed for silent reading. So even in like the
Yeah.
first early scholasticism that came into place, they were shocked that people were reading quietly. So that's the second part of it. Because
Wow.
when you're
Yeah.
now by yourself in your room reading, you're reading quietly within your head.
Yeah.
And it's now about the headiness of it all, you know what I mean? You're systematizing, you're categorizing. And what's what happens? What do we see after Plato? Aristotle. And what does he do? Categorizes everything.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Everything is category. The human is a part now about civis, about his duty to the civic duty. He has in his Oregonon broken down things into quality, time, space, present, so on and so forth. So even knowledge, to him he described knowledge as sensory input and how you take that in and do experimentations upon it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
everything became inside the head. The world of the head became everything within the literary mindset or the
Mm,
literary eye.
mhm.
So the problem with that, so even though we can talk about that, the main problem that I even introduce in my book is that literacy will walk a path to the mechanization of world picture. And that's the second part of the book, actually.
Yeah, so this is really fascinating historical fact you're talking about the invention of these vowels that made it possible
Yes, to silently
to,
read. That
to
wasn't
silently
a
read.
thing beforehand. Yes.
That is like because somebody said to me recently that writing was a technological invention, and I was like,
Hmm.
okay, I was kind of like, well, in what sense? Because it's kind of innate, like we have a linguistic innate capacity. So I was like, well, is it technological? Because I would say like our innate capacity to reproduce, is that technological? So but there is this kind of weird
Hmm.
blurry ground with
Hmm.
linguistics where there is a kind of innate naturalness to it, but at the same time,
Hmm.
there is actually like things in history you can point to. They're like literal inventions. So
Hmm. Yep.
so that's an interesting area in itself. But so yeah, so it kind of there is then this tension, I think, between the the capacity to read internally, and then sort of the
The need
logos
to systematize, yes. The
is
logos, the
then
need to systematize, yes.
internally systematized,
Yes.
whereas before
Yes.
that, the sort of logos is kind of externally kind of shared or something or expressed.
Yeah,
It's
think about Socrates and his dialogue. That's the way the logos. So that's the sort of middle ground between these two. So you have the
yeah.
logos, but it's through dialogue. Our arguments are being, they're being. You have to walk down the individual through the argument before you get to the end goal of it all. And then that completely changed. Dialogues dies with, Plato.
Yeah,
And
because
instead,
there's a social process going on there too. There's a sort of
exactly,
social process,
exactly,
and
exactly.
I did a reading. I made a little course about like Plato's pedagogy about a year or two ago, and a lot of what I was doing was I was looking at these dialogues which are like very kind of really highlight the personalities in the dialogues, like
Okay.
Alcibiades or like Lysis talking about friendship, or and like Socrates is always dealing with a younger student,
Mm-hmm.
and the student is kind of like making mistakes, but they're sort of endearing mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a kind of shared experience which is kind of a camaraderie or a kind of platonic
Tutelage.
love going on there too. There's a kind of human side to it that you
Mm-hmm.
don't get, and a kind of dramatism to it that you don't get with like Aristotle, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can
Because it's
see
all
that.
facts after that. And that's why, when we look at the medieval period as well, or the coming periods that come afterwards, what we have is the same problems that you have with hyper-rational thought. You get, people who are trying to, you know, continue the physics of disenchanting of the world, where no more is it God who is the first person, the first sort of pusher of everything, but you have Aristotle introduced, no, it's enforced motion. And then from enforced motion, you have the impetus theory. But then the problem is you have William Occam that comes laser. Have you heard of Occam's razor?
I've heard that. I actually don't know what the
So it's
actual thing.
everything must be reduced down to the simplest thing in a sense,
Okay.
because the whole problem is the same Descartesian problem that comes later is how do we know anything? How can we trust our senses?
Hmm.
Because when you live in the eternal world and your senses is the only thing that you could take in information, how do you know what you're taking is correct now? That's the end goal of it all. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So that's why
Okay.
we always come to that same revolution of people will do grand things in a sense, but then they'll come to a point of nominalism with Occam and these people, and they'll be like, how do we know anything? And then they'll say, oh, forget it, we'll keep moving on. And then once again, a Descartes will come or a Hume will come and be like, well, once again, how can we know anything? And they'll be like, well, we can't really. And then you'll get the same thing happen to Vienna Circle in the modern day. And
Hmm.
then we have postmodernism as an example, as a reaction to the Vienna Circle in a sense. And that's just the cycle that we're going to because you can never fully apprehend the world through no metaphysics, you know what I mean? You need to have this sort of middle ground between, and Plato was the best example of that, where he still believed in the demiurge or this hypothesis of a king god, a philosopher god who's connected to higher principles, to higher authority. And these are the things that only these are the natural dialectic processes that continue like it's like a conversation with the world, this dialectical processes where you're still grounded, you're still connected to this higher authority, but then you're still able to apprehend the world around you in this sort of balanced type of way. Because if you go too far, and I think it's what literature does is it enters one side of your brain only. It's like this sort of hyper rational side of your brain. And this other sort of mythos side of your brain, which is natural to us too. I think these are both two competing brain sides or whatever. That gets lost. And that's why we talked about Byung-Chul Han's crisis of narration. You get the story of the boy who he can't tell a story at all now. He can't have fun and tell his sister a story as a child story that he
Hmm.
uses an example. Where she says, well, just if you have a problem, just start off with like the story of a mouse. And he's like, what kind of mouse is it? Is it a vol? Is it this type of mouse? Is it that type of mouse? He just starts categorizing things instantly. And it's through this process of coming back to this sort of metaphysical grand world where his parents sent him on a journey to this house that's magical and mystical that he's able to come back and say, "Oh my God, we didn't expect what I saw this house in this grand place." And that's the step that we need to take. It's not to completely take away literacy or to completely go into orality, but it's to find this middle path. If
Yeah.
you get what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
It's like harmony, a balance between the two,
It's a
maybe. Yeah.
harmony, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, like, this is the reason I'm sort of, I suppose, contemplating the sort of benefits of orality. It's just because it's
Hmm.
novel to me because I've sort of grown up in a
Hmm.
society which doesn't do that at all,
Hmm.
and I'm a product of that as well, I think, and
Yes.
I'm kind of I'd like to challenge my sort of my presumptions about that. So,
Hmm.
um, and also I really like music and I really like poetry and I really like good speech. Is something that we've lost in the past like 50 years is speechcraft. Like
I agree,
have you heard a
bro.
politician give a good speech and like fast like I've never
No,
heard.
no, I haven't. I've heard Nick Fuentes give good speeches though. That guy's crazy orator.
It's exactly that's what I
Yeah.
like. That's why I was saying like you get these figures. I think Peterson was a bit like this too. He was a very good orator.
Hmm. Hmm.
Fuente is a very good orator, and it's like yeah, like, there's lots of things we can disagree with these people on, but there is something about them that's like
Hmm.
it's novel. It's like where did that come
Hmm.
from? And I think
Yeah. They're able
you
to
then
capture the people's hearts.
yeah, and then you get
Hmm.
this kind of very sort of, I suppose you could say you get a kind of literary centric response, you could even say to that, and it's kind of like, oh, this is hate speech, and this is going to rile people up, and this is going to make people like
Hmm.
too passionate or too angry or to whatever, and it's like there's a kind of prudence and a kind of aversion to orality, I think. I was
Hmm.
writing something recently, and I don't know if you know this, but um, I was contemplating because good example actually, which we could bring up here is I don't know if you know the history of psychoanalysis, of Freud's work, and the translation of Freud's work from German to English.
Okay,
Um,
no.
they took the a word for soul in German,
Hmm.
Seele, and
Hmm.
they made it mind.
Okay.
So, but it's not soul. And Freud, whenever Freud used the word soul, basically,
Hmm.
the English translators made it mind. And I was
Hmm.
contemplating there's a kind of like there's a kind of failure of translation there. There's the English speaking world was trying to make Freud's work more kind of scientific or materialistic or something.
Hmm. Mind oriented, yeah.
Yeah, and that distorted it. And there was a German psychoanalyst who wrote an entire book complaining about
Hmm.
this, basically saying they've distorted everything because they've
Hmm.
taken away the human subjectivity and so on.
Hmm.
And the and like the space for metaphysics to be left open by using the word soul
Hmm.
perhaps was there, you
Hmm.
know. So
Hmm.
there's a kind of, you start to see these tensions everywhere. But
Hmm.
I want to talk about the atomists because they're an interesting crowd
Hmm.
because they are like the first materialists, right? I mean, they
Yes.
kind of, and I'm really badly read on them. I've never actually
Hmm.
partialed through these classical
Hmm. I
atomists.
haven't either really too much, man.
Well, you've done enough
Yeah.
to say something about it anyway. So,
Hmm.
but they're like, so I did a little bit quick bit of research on them, and it was like they're
Hmm.
posited a kind of metaphysics, or not even a metaphysics, I suppose a metaphysics or a sort of
No, it's sort of like anti-metaphysics,
well,
actually.
anti-metaphysics, yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah. They're the first. They're the
it's
first. Yeah.
it's that the world is made of like atoms, right? That it's everything is
Yeah.
like divided into
Yes.
these little things called atoms, and
Hmm.
everything's very divisible, and everything is, and it kind of reminds me of like Cartesian dualism because you have like dead matter, and
Hmm.
then I was thinking the opposite to dead matter would be like animism where
Oh, you think
everything
so?
is alive and imbued,
Everything's
like
alive.
the kind of oral
Hmm.
culture, everything is alive and it's imbued with a kind of narrative and a kind of life force and a kind of faith or a kind of
Hmm.
character or something. And then the opposite to that is like dead matter. Everything is just
Hmm.
dead matter, and we can sort
Hmm.
of dissect it and analyze it and
Hmm.
manipulate it even maybe with
So
modern science.
when it comes to the Atomists, what the main thing that I wanted to sort of strike was that this is the literate sort of goal, the literacy that it's not a barbarism in a sense, but it's a sort of deconstructing or taking apart. That's the nature of literacy, sort of to get to the bottom of. So they're always trying to analyze, nitpick, because when you have the ability to hold an argument now on paper, in a sense, then you can actually start dismantling the argument. Beforehand, that's why uh, Plato didn't like mythos because you couldn't take time to break down the argument
Yeah.
like what's being said here. So the atomists were the first people to sit back and be like, well, what are these arguments saying? Is it saying these are these epic saying that if I'm a bad person, I'll go to hell? Well, I don't really believe in hell. Actually, you know what? I believe in reconstructing morality based upon pain and pleasure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So what I was trying to show was that the intervention of literacy is this sort of intervention of breaking down. And also, like we said, when you're in your head, that's the only time you could ever hyper imagine this um, atom that they never saw before. They never saw an atom before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't know they didn't even know if the atom even existed. But the atom was supposed to just hold this sort of like mind subject in your brain type of this image that there is this one thing and everything can be broken down into this one thing and
Yeah.
from there we can start building back up again, you know?
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the whole point for me about the atomists. It wasn't so much about their beliefs or anything like that, but it was about how literacy legitimately will deconstruct all arguments. And that's what it gives you the ability to do. And that's what they did. They sort of deconstructed the past that they had and they want to reconstruct a new future.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because you see then the kind of, as you were saying, the thing Illich said about Plato, the cautious man of letters or whatever it was.
Yeah.
He's kind of like in the middle of this revolution of
Hmm.
writing, and he's seeing the benefits of it, but he's also like, oh my God, like
If you
these
externalize all memory now, who's going to remember anything, number one?
yeah,
But also if we he also did agree in slightly with the Atomists in the sense that he wanted to break down mythos. He wanted to break down the myths that we had in front of him, and he wanted to be like, whichever ones are good, we'll keep them. Whichever ones are bad, we'll get rid of them.
yeah, yeah.
So he did kind of agree with them to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's funny because that part of the noble lie in Plato's Republic where he says,
Hmm.
okay, well, let's pretend like all these people were made of predominantly gold, these people are made of predominantly silver and predominantly copper,
Hmm.
and then and it's like obviously this isn't true, but like
Hmm.
we're sort of keep it, but we'll sort of control the myth so
Hmm.
that it's sort of good for like public morality or constructing a public education system. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
And like you kind of read that and you kind of think, well, that's kind of cynical, but at the same time,
Hmm.
it shows you that there is a kind of a view of storytelling and myth and illusion, which I think emerges within literacy, which is a bit like, well, like okay, like we can control it, we can sort of manipulate it, we can use it to achieve an objective, right?
Hmm.
Instead of, I
Hmm.
would think before the view would be something like, well, no, it has a life force of its own, and we
True,
can't
but
really, it kind of overwhelms us, you know?
yeah, but then you can even think about it in their descriptions of man, you know. Like for example, when Plato talks about the philosopher king, he's still connected to this higher being, you know. But then we go to Aristotle and he talks about man as we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the individual now, where man's connected still to the people around him, but to his own eudaimonia in a sense. But then we have the atomists now, who we've now gone full sort of individual, where they say the individual is the only thing that matters. Pain and pleasure of the individual is the only thing that matters. So it's not, so it's it's objectivity, yes, but you can see how the objectivity changes from the connection. We're still in this enchanted world, as you say, in this mythos world, and we still have this dialectical process. But then we go to Aristotle, who's there is no more, we have there is no the world is disenchanted to a certain extent, and then we have complete with the atomists, we have just the individual now, and building principles all based upon the individual. So I'm
Mm.
trying to show that literacy is this sort of process of deconstruction. It will legitimately get to this singular point and try and build off of it. And we saw that happen post sort of scholasticism and post-humanism. When the church fell out and they lost their way, how did they start rebuilding principles? The social contract was their way to doing it. You know, we have to just build from the individual, from the social contract starts from the individual first and builds up from there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm trying to say that the argument for me is that literacy is a mechanization of worldview. Literacy would lead naturally to this individual. Individual becomes bipedal machine. Bipedal machine becomes this binary individual we are today. And so that's the kind of map I was trying to show in the book. It's not too much that I really do care so much about their argumentations or so on and so forth. It's legitimately a book of showing how consciousness will change from oral cultures to literate cultures and how literacy has this sort of need for mechanization.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
and now we have
it
cybernetics of today and transhumanism.
yeah, so like when it gets out of hand here, we start to get
Yes.
into this problems, yeah.
Yeah, and I
Um,
don't think it gets out of hand. The same tradition happens throughout history, you know what I mean? So I don't I want to say that it's just a natural byproduct
yeah.
of the side effect of literacy.
Like as soon as writing was invented, this will be an inevitable tension forever.
Exactly. As
Mhm.
soon as you had
Yeah.
people reading and writing silently within their head, and their head was the only way, and even that's why uh, Aristotle says knowledge can only be done through sensory inputs because the brain is the only way that we can rationalize the world around us.
Yeah.
Then we're going to live in a mechanical world.
Yeah.
The writing's on the wall already. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah. So there's I was kind of taking a quick look at my notes because I had some other things I wanted to bring up. Um, okay. So we've sort of done, I think we've given people a good taste of the kind of the basic theory, I think, of the book,
Yeah.
literacy, orality, mythos, logos, the atomism,
Hmm.
the oral cultures. So
Yeah.
maybe we can go into because the subtitle of the book is I think is like literacy, orality, and modern identity, right? Is the
Modern
subtitle?
identity.
So
Yes.
like,
Yes. It's modern
how
identity.
does
Yeah.
modern identity? How do you fit that into it?
So for the arguments towards modern identity, I sort of just introduced sort of the fragmentization of the world coming, you know. If we live in a world of many eyes now, where everybody, before we were a we, as we say in orality, but now we're eyes, everybody has an eye to view the world.
Hmm.
I say that the problem of pluralism is that you will live in an uncertain world where you can't really ground anything in truth anymore. You can't ground morals. You can't ground a lot of things because now you have the reign of subjectivity. How can I be sure of anything if everybody has an opinion on something? You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
this is what I say. I say this is like the argumentation of Nietzsche. Nietzsche was trying to get to a moral stance in this world. He was trying to find, that's why he famously says there is no truth, you know? He's like, how can there be truth in a world where everybody has a truth?
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
the later part of my argument. My arguments go from where the world is today, where we don't have, the chance for truth, and we don't have sort of a chance for, I wouldn't want to say hope. I'd say we have, if we were to go back and take a step back, it would be the challenge is much more harder than people may think it is.
The the challenge for what, like constructing our own morals, or the chance to like live,
Yes,
or just
constructing
to
it sort
live
of a
morally?
universal, yes, a universal belief
Okay.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and again, like you see that within the technology. I mean, the internet has given everyone its own kind of platform, basically, to be
Yeah.
their own
Yeah, to be
individual.
their own, yeah. And
Uh,
even individuals like in Crime and Punishment and Raskolnikov was trying to find that. He was trying to, you know, in a world of abstract theory. He's coming from a world of abstract theory. He's a university student. He's a graduate, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And he wanted to sort of recultivate the world. And he says, you know what I mean? I, as an individual, I could be sort of a Napoleon figure, and I'm a great man. I could find the answers in the world. But then when he goes around and he does these things that he does, I don't want to ruin the book for anybody. The shock of the real hits him. The shock of, the not the real metaphysics of the world hits him, and he realizes that this world is a lot more, there's more to it than meets the eye. It's not just simple abstraction. Practicality is a lot
yeah.
more real,
It's like
So,
uh Clausewitz, he always says the kind of theoretical abstract
mhm,
contemplations of like strategy always just get destroyed by reality, you know?
yeah.
And like
It,
there's
it,
too many, particularly in war, because he said there was just too many contingencies
mhm,
in war. It was always going to be this like disappointment of an abstraction against
mhm,
the meaning, right? So you kind of get that with that, and like that even in itself, I think was a crisis of very well educated people running the military and sort of thinking in a very abstract way, and
true.
and uh and then kind of having these disappointments and failures kind of
Mhm.
over and over again of and kind of thinking of why that was happening. There's so
But
many, yeah,
even
like
to
there's so many things we could
But
go on.
even
So
to that point,
go ahead.
it's the same thing that von Neumann in game theory and logicians had the issue of doing too. Is when you try and calculate the world around you into quantifiable metrics, you will always come to the issue that there's more complexity and that these ideas, these war games that they have, these game theory ideas, when you try and bring that into the real world, people are like, no, there's more to it than that. I'm not gonna like, send bombs off to Russia just because you said so. And
Mm.
I think JFK, or I can't remember who came after him, said, you know what, we're not gonna do that. And the Cold War came to an end because he decided not to blow up people. But game theory, if we were going by the logicians of war and how war-minded people would look at the world, they'd be dropping bombs on everybody to no
Yeah,
to
they
no
don't
go.
kind
You know
of
what
they
I
don't
mean?
kind of contemplate the political the kind of political consequences of things. They kind of
Yeah,
separate,
it's it's what
particularly like modern war theory completely
yeah
separates politics from war. It's like politics is this other thing. We think
yeah
purely in terms of strategy, and then older thinkers were like, no, war is part of the political, it's an extension of the political, and then
yeah
so
and
they forget
it's
all these things, you know?
Yeah, and it's the same thing with economics when they do behavioral economics, when they talk about
Yeah,
the rational individual and how he would interact with the economic system. And it ends up becoming that the rational man becomes irrational later on down the line. You know what I mean? All his actions are actually irrational.
yeah,
So all these sort of ways in which they want to segment the world, even when we talk about what happened with the Gaia hypothesis that comes later on with people trying to determine that the world is this, Mother Nature and it's balanced altogether naturally. It's like, no, that's a cybernetic idea that balance exists. We live in a chaotic world, actually. And when they try to do that, I think the Odom brothers in America try to do this. They try to map the world, their little Colorado village, into the computer. They realize that it's impossible and that they can never do that. And there is no sort of balance of nature. And they tried to even do that tracking animals too. They tracked wolves and deers, and they tried to see how the natural population would maybe curb each other, and there was a balance to it. And there was chaos. Animals die through diseases, weather things happen that destroy habitats, and so on and so forth. And they realized that there is no way that you can do these things, but it's only through this sort of rational that we understand that we live in an irrational world. And that's what keeps happening time and time again. I think that's what Daniel Botkin came to as well, his conclusion.
yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the exact same thing is happening now with, I think, with things like AI and so
Exactly.
forth. It's just like, or like dating
What,
apps, for example. It's just always the same thing. It's like the irrational is just always there, and
yeah,
these systems built by people. I mean, like you just gonna think about like people who build dating apps. Like it's like I'm pretty sure Mark Zuckerberg actually did the prototypes for them. Like 'cause
that's
his
funny.
his Facebook was basically kind of like a dating app. Originally,
Okay.
like I think he built Facebook in order to like categorize all the women that he found attractive
Yes, yes, yes,
in
he
his
did. Yeah.
university. So he was
Yeah,
being like an autist,
yeah.
categorizing
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And then that's how it's and then that's how it flowed out. And then that same basic schema was adopted by dating apps, and they're like, well, let's categorize these people in this profile. And this
Hmm.
person works at this
Hmm.
job, and this person wants this. And then like if you have a dating app these days, it's like it's like all this pointless information, like
Yeah.
it's trivia that is just so irrelevant. It's
Hmm.
bombarding with trivia, and it gives people such
Hmm.
an excuse to be like, "Well, no, this doesn't fit my category. I don't like this
Yeah.
person."
Yeah.
Completely blocking out the world, and
Yeah.
you kind of get this excessive categorization, and systematizing which goes on, and it does just block out. And then you get like the loneliness crisis, and you get like
Hmm.
birth gap things, and again like
And
the real world just sort of goes blah, blah, blah. But I wonder.
to that point quickly, I just wanted to
Yeah.
say, what you realize is the sort of, I wouldn't say the beginning is that when you have information overload, your only option is analysis paralysis. You're
Mm,
going to be paralyzed by optionality, and that's why these people can never make a decision because there's too many options available to them,
mm.
and that's why and even sitting with themselves, like, what do you really want? It's like when you have too many options, you don't even have to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's like, and then we build technologies that can parcel through this information quicker than we can and kind of
Exactly.
make decisions for us. I don't
Exactly.
know.
Make a decision for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I was talking to a friend recently, he was like applying for jobs, and he was saying um, that they're using AI now to just basically scan hundreds and hundreds
Scan
of
people.
CVs,
Yeah.
scan, scan,
Yeah.
scan, scan. Because it's like, it's like they have too many CVs to look through. They don't want to spend,
Yeah.
naturally, they don't
You know
want
what's
to spend
funny
the day.
about that
Yeah.
is I can't remember. There's like this AI startup in California where they realized that using AI systems to hire people isn't that good, and they would rather just talk to people. And they say they've hired the best people just by talking to them, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
So even these AI systems who people are using, they're like, you know what? Maybe AI is not the best way to get people to get hired.
yeah, yeah. Actually, like one of my speaking of sort of informational overload, one of my favorite examples of this actually was given by Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, and he
Yeah.
said, I actually made a recording and put some images on it on my YouTube channel if people want to go see it. But it's he was describing Caesar. So when Caesar was at the Rubicon and he was contemplating to cross the Rubicon or not, he had a moment apparently that he was wondering what he basically knew like if he crossed the Rubicon, like basically history would change, everything would change. This could all go catastrophically wrong. He didn't know what to do. He was kind of immobilized. He was frozen by the options,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
he saw a young man playing like whatever the guitar was back then, whatever they called them, somewhere across the river. And he said, "This is a sign from one of the gods." And
Hmm.
he said, "That's it. We're going to take our destiny is here. Take it." And what Sloterdijk said happened here was basically he saw he basically blocked out all information and he focused in on one piece of information, only
Hmm.
one, and he
Hmm.
he allowed that information to sort of present itself to him as an interpretation.
Okay.
And that interpretational um thinking where everything else is blocked out, but there's one thing which kind of presents itself to him, kind of very much like very kind of I would say a Heideggerian understanding, kind of in the
Hmm.
world, being in the world, and the world reveals
Hmm.
itself to you.
The dialectical process, yeah.
Yeah, he mobilized himself. He
Hmm.
sort of took grasp
Hmm.
of history, and I think that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why today it's like nothing ever happens. We have these memes all that nothing
Yeah.
ever happens, and it's sort of like that because it's not just that we have too much information or we have too many
Hmm.
options, it's that we don't
Hmm.
know how to
Hmm.
be in the world and let just one
Hmm.
important significant thing reveal itself to us, and then let that kind of draw us towards our
Draws.
destiny. If you get me?
You know what's hilarious is that exactly the same like mental issues that we go to today, like through schizophrenia, BPD, bipolar disorder. What is it? It's too many thoughts and it's too many voices.
Yeah, yeah,
It's exactly what you're talking about. It's just too many voices inside your head that you can't make a decision, that you're
yeah.
overwhelmed. And, that's like the digital age. It's so many nodes within our brain, so many voices, so many opinions, so much data, so much fact that you can't come to, not only you can't come to conclusion, but it can lead to a sort of mental disorder. So it's funny how the mental schizophrenia and all these things map exactly what's going on too.
Yeah. And it's actually the question is mobility. I think a lot of times people are immobilized. It's like too much going on. There's a lack of harmony. There's a lack
Hmm.
of grace. They use kind of Christian term
Hmm.
grace. There's a lack of fluency. We could say if you think about like learning a language, it's all very clumsy. It's like, oh, I gotta think, gotta
Yes.
think. But then when you're fluent,
Hmm.
it's like a kind of so there's a kind of and like I'm actually planning on writing a book at some stage in the future about like the ontology of movement and kind of mobility. So
Okay.
this is really good, helpful like background research for that because that's
Hmm.
that's very good. But information overload, I think, it is immobilizing in that sense. But so I
Yeah.
was thinking like a solution to this could be something like I was thinking like kind of musicology, a kind of music because music has a rhythm. There's a kind of thing if you listen to music or you're dancing or something, you're in the moment and you're kind of immersed, you know.
Hmm.
And Plato has this one tiny little section in the Republic on
Hmm.
music as part of the
Hmm.
education of the philosophers or of the
Hmm.
guardians.
Hmm.
And he says basically something. He doesn't actually say in terms of informational overload, but he says something like,
Hmm.
you know, uh, he's always trying to get these guardians to be like rational and clever, like philosophers, but not sort of kind of not displaying, we could say, because they're also supposed to be soldiers and politicians, and they're supposed to be kind of ambitious, and like he doesn't want them to be sort of like these rational, nerdy people that don't know how to
Hmm.
fight or
Hmm.
don't know how to reproduce or don't know how
Hmm.
to navigate on the seas or sail or
Hmm.
like lead other people and stuff. So he's always trying to balance these two things, and he does suggest music is helpful because it sort of helps harmonize the soul, so you can get these sort of
Hmm.
rational aspects and these irrational aspects, and you can sort of unify them a bit more. And I wonder maybe because also what's happened, I don't know if you know Mark Fisher, but like he
Hmm.
wrote back the end of history stuff that like we were losing our music capacity, that the
Oh.
music was just going to crap. Like and this was he died like back in like 2015, I
Yeah,
think, or something.
this is
But
not capital reason. This is his hontology book, his second book,
ontology and
right?
capitalist realism,
Yeah.
that guy,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah.
Um.
So like historical subjectivity was being lost. The the sort of musical intelligence that we or creativity that we possess was being lost. And
Hmm.
he kind of connected those two things and said like historical subjectivity and and kind of if you do a study of music, you can see that like from like the 60s
Hmm.
to the 90s there was good music, and then all of a sudden there
Hmm.
was a kind of stratification and people just kept repeating the same thing. It gets very codified and repetitive.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then now you can say, well, AI is just going to write some music for us, So,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh,
Well, I think Byung-Chul Han's crisis of narration. I think just that the individual is not able to narrate anymore in this day and age. I think likewise, you can make the argument that music and narratives are similar, and maybe, to a certain extent come together on that point. But I'm not too sure. What's interesting is that what I understand about music is maybe the same thing that Hebrew, Arabic, and the Phoenicians had in the past, is that their language was spoken always orally, as even if it was written, it was had to be read out loud for it to come into to process or into actuality. So
yeah,
maybe it's what he wanted to capture was the fact that music and these languages like Hebrew and Arabic and so on and so forth, they use both sides of your brain as opposed to one side of it, as literacy
okay.
does. You know what I mean? Silent reading. So maybe this is this natural brain mechanism that we need to use both sides of it. And maybe music is a way to puncture that creative, that sort of dialectical, natural, internal voice that you have. Maybe it punctures that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think it
And it's not
allows
surprising too that, like, even like think about when you play Hebrew chants or Arabic, the Quran, it's always like beautified, they
mm,
try and make it so beautiful, and that adds to its memory, that adds to it being withheld in people's brain. So maybe there's something that maybe that comes back to it as well.
yeah, definitely. I think even like if you go into a church and you hear the hymns or something,
Yeah,
there's a kind
exactly.
of like
Yeah,
there's a kind of it sort of
it gives
softens
life to it.
our rational mind, and it kind
Yeah,
of allows us to have a bit more grace and a bit more character
yeah,
and a bit more internal harmony in a world
exactly.
where we're constantly using.
Totally.
And that's probably one of the basic psychological reasons why things like religion are becoming more popular now, again,
Could be. Yes,
because
yes.
it's just a method. It's a method of
Hmm.
helping sort of soften, I think, the excessive use of the
Yes,
rational brain,
exactly.
calculate, choice,
Yeah.
choice. Like,
Yeah. I think people are choking on the rationality of it all, and they need to just, like you said, harken back to this dialectical process that speaks within them, that natural voice that they have. And that's what gets, like you said, that's what gets clouded. That's what gets clouded in the modern day. You're not able to hear your own voice. Your own voice is muddled by the voices of so many others. So, maybe sitting with yourself, strumming away at your guitar, making that that poetry, you know what I mean, is one way of doing it.
yeah. And the most incredible thing about poetry is like, you know, I can write I can write a Substack essay like once a week, probably, like in my spare time
Hmm.
around other duties like work and so on. I can actually describe, maybe not, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe. I've tried writing poetry before, and I've written maybe like about two or three that I could actually be
Proud of.
proud enough to actually put on my Substack. But
Yeah.
it's like three a year. Like I can't do it.
Yeah.
Like like it has to sort of just come to me from like the middle of like from nowhere, and I have to sort of like it's so like I can't sit down and go, what will I think about today?
Hmm.
Okay, that's a good topic, and I want to talk about
Hmm.
that, and oh, that's a good reference, and
Hmm.
I could do that all the time with so I haven't had a writing block when it comes to like rational essay work in like
Hmm.
5 years, but like literally couldn't do more than two poems a year.
You know what's interesting about this is, wait, do you read poetry often though?
Not too often. I'm starting to do it more.
Okay.
I do
I realize
sometimes.
that you got to
Yeah,
put yourself in your mindset. Like, if you
yeah,
read poetry often and then you go for a walk, you'll realize you're poetic, I think.
yeah, yeah.
I think it's just like what you sort of put yourself within the world of, because you have to, it's like chess, like Magnus Carlsen. Have you seen the Joe Rogan podcast? He said that he'll do a chess game and then he'll go about his day normally, but he'll keep thinking about that chess game in his head. Like he'll keep playing it back, what mistakes he made, so on and so forth.
Mm.
And I think that's all you have to do with sort of like poetry or anything like that. You just have to like read a poem, read Chaucer, read whatever it is that you like, and
Yeah.
then go about the day just having that ringing in the back of your head. And then eventually you'll start, you know what I mean, off the cuff.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's why
that's part of it.
oddly enough, who does this, Russell Brand.
Yeah,
Russell Brand, he's a great orator, great
yeah,
speaker,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but he memorized Hamlet or whatever plays that he had to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when he has that in his sort of coffins of his mind, he just can naturally just speak beautifully. So I think you
Yeah.
have to like get it in your head and live with it, and then it becomes natural to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah. I think it's good if like if you're someone who reads a lot of nonfiction, if you read like philosophy, history, political theory stuff, it's good to just have something in the background too, a bit of poetry or even like the Bible or something, just something that's
Yeah.
not rational and just
Yeah,
sort of have that just
exactly.
softening the
Whoa, whoa,
chronic
whoa. Did
yeast
you
of
just
your
say the Bible's not rational? Whoa, whoa.
well, I mean, in a good way, right? If it was too rational, it probably wouldn't be interesting. I just read like some science book or something, you know.
whoa.
I'm just gonna pour the rest of my drink out in